Hey guys, in this video I'll be going over how to taxi, take off, and land in the Hornet. This video will be for ground ops only. I'll have a separate video for taxiing and taking off from the carrier, and then another video for landing on the carrier. Let's go over taxi first. You need to have this button binded, undesignate nose wheel steering. When you start up the Hornet, the nose wheel steering should be on by default, and you can tell by it saying NWS here. But just in case it's not on, you can press that undesignate nose wheel steering button to turn it on. Then you can press on the parking lever to release the parking brake. You can push your throttles forward a little bit to start moving, and you can use your rudder pedals to turn. If you need to brake, you can press down on your pedals. The Hornet has two nose wheel steering modes. By default, you'll be in normal mode, but if you hold down the nose wheel steering button, it'll switch to high sensitivity mode. High sensitivity mode is meant to be used on the carrier, but you can also use it on the ground when you need to make a tight turn. Now let's go over how to take off. First, make sure your flaps are set to half. Then you need to set your takeoff trim by holding down this trim button for a second. Then you're going to push your throttle all the way forward to afterburner, and as you start moving, your speed here is going to go up. Once you get to around 150 knots, then you can pull back on the stick and you should take off the runway. So let's go ahead and take off now. There's 150 knots, so I'm going to pull back and take off like that. And then you can raise your landing gear and your flaps. You can turn off the afterburner, and that's how you take off in the Hornet. Now let's go over how to land in the Hornet. First, you need to set your plane up for landing. Make sure you don't have either of the master modes selected. If you do, just deselect them. Then make sure your hook bypass switch is set to field. This is assuming we're landing on an airbase, of course. If you're landing on a carrier, then you'd have it set to carrier, but that is for a different video. Then you need to slow down below 250 knots. You can see your airspeed right here. If you want to slow down faster, you can use the speed brake switches here. The speed brake is this panel on the back of the plane that you can use to help you slow down. Once the plane is below 250 knots, you can lower the gear, and you can put your flaps to full. When you're lined up with the runway and coming in for landing, you want to pay attention to two things. First, this circle is the velocity vector, which shows where your plane is going. You want to put the velocity vector on the runway, and then you can see this bracket here called the E bracket. You want the E bracket to be surrounding the velocity vector. Preferably, you want the velocity vector to be right in the middle of the E bracket. The way the E bracket works is that it's based on your angle of attack. The angle of attack is basically the pitch of your plane relative to its direction of flight. So when you're coming in for landing, if your plane is pitched up more, then the E bracket is going to move down. And if your plane is pitched down more or flying straighter, then your E bracket is going to be up. So in this case, you can see my E bracket is up here. So I would need to reduce my speed a little bit and pitch the plane up a little bit to get the E bracket to come down. You may also notice this here, which is the AOA indexer. This basically works the same way as the E bracket. If you see the circle in the middle, that means you're at the right angle for landing. And if you have the E bracket surrounding the velocity vector, you're going to see the circle too. If you see the red arrow down here, that means you're going too fast, which means you need to slow down and pitch the plane up a little bit. If you see the green arrow up here, that means you're going too slow. But I wouldn't really look at the AOA indexer, I would just look at the E bracket because it's basically the same thing and it's more accurate. So what I'm going to do now is bring my throttle back a tiny bit and pitch the plane up. And you can see now my velocity vector is in the middle of the E bracket. So coming in for landing is basically just making sure the velocity vector is on the runway and making sure it's in the middle of the E bracket. Once you touch down, you can open your speed brake to help you slow down, and you can also press on the brake pedals. Once you've slowed down enough, you can close your speed brake, lift your flaps up all the way, make sure your nose wheel steering is on, and then you can taxi off the runway. That was taxi, takeoff, and landing in the Hornet. Thanks for checking out this video, and I'll see you later.